I think the main thing that we have to remember is there is a lot of error in this report. So I would not take much away from this. A key thing that there's an issue with, in the sense that when they're sampling the data, specifically around November, that the survey period was condensed into later in the month, when you typically have significant holiday discounting. And when we spoke with BLS, they said they're not doing anything to adjust those seasonals. So that automatically makes the data artificially weak, and we're probably going to see a bounce back in December.
Is there a trend we can take away from here that, boy, it's at least inflation is not going up from here? Is that a fair takeaway? Maybe it's not cooling as much as these numbers might suggest, but it doesn't appear to be rising?
I think that's entirely fair.
Okay.
That there was this concern that around the holiday season, companies wouldn't really do the typical discounting that they usually do because of the tariffs. That doesn't appear to be the case. And we knew this heading into the data print, because if you looked at a number of different indicators that survey the companies ahead of this holiday season, it showed a normal holiday discounting year. So it doesn't appear like there was this lapse in discounting just because of tariffs. In fact, it was a typical year for discounting. And then on top of that, you have some of the issues within the data because of the government shutdown.
So Myron's been out here, Governor Myron. We got to lower rates. A whole bunch of other people. There's been a clear tendency within Bloomberg's surveillance of people looking at a disinflationary tendency. Is it a January tendency, or is it a Fed meeting waiting out midsummer?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we'll see is inflation will bounce back in the next couple of prints. The economy will start to pick up again, in which case the Fed's probably going to be on hold for much of the beginning of next year.
So, again, the Fed, I mean, if you look at, so you don't think the Fed's going to look at these numbers and say, we've got inflation?
I sure hope not.
You sure hope not, because you think the data in the next couple of months could, in fact, show a little bit more inflation in the economy.
Yeah, and we know that there was an issue. I mean, they didn't even collect the October CPI for the most part. We know that there are issues with the data.
Yep.
So to form a strong conclusion about this print in particular as being some massive disinflationary period, I think is entirely inaccurate.
Stephanie Roth with us with Wolfe Research, and we continue here. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene with Lisa Mateo and John Tucker. Good morning across the nation. Sirius XM, Channel 121. Good morning, Canada. I mentioned David Rosenberg up in Toronto with a disinflationary call. Nailed that into this report. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. We're thrilled to finish 2025 strong, humbled by the signups there each and every day at Bloomberg Podcast. Paul Sweeney with Stephanie Roth.
All right, so we've got an inflation environment that's at least okay at this point. How about the labor market? What did you take away from some of the labor data earlier?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what we're seeing is a labor market that's holding up a lot better, and in fact starting to inflect a bit higher from here. And I think that's the main conclusion that we should take away from the headline jobs numbers. Let me rephrase it. The private payrolls numbers. Okay. The headline jobs numbers are impacted again by not necessarily the government shutdown in particular, but the deferred resignation program, which ended at the end of September. These are people who took a severance package. This is not people who lost their jobs. So if you look at the private payroll numbers, they were actually quite decent. Now we're looking at a trend that's close to in the 70,000 range, which is really not bad. And the fact the unemployment rate rose is less of a concern, I think, partially because there was, again, some issues with the government shutdown impacting the data. And then in today's inflation data, the airlines were a big driver of the weakness, and that there was also canceled flights. There was just a lot going on in the print.
So your first look at the noise is the airlines.
First look at the noise is the airlines. They fell 6.5% over 2 months, so it comes out to about 3% each month.
Right.
If you look at the core number was 0.159 across both months. That's quite low. Apparel was pretty weak. That is probably tied to this whole holiday discounting issue. Right. So there's a lot of sort of noise within the report, in part tied to the government shutdown, and part tied to the fact that it's just a sort of less inflationary backdrop than
Stephanie Roth drives the market higher. Futures up 40 now, up 47. NASDAQ up 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100, I should say, the VIX 16.83. I look at this stuff. I look at the whole ballet of it all. And I am more than certain, I learned this from David Rosenberg at Merrill years ago, Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith.
Yep.
I saw an article that it's just Merrill. I said, it will never just be Merrill.
Yep.
You just mentioned it. The pros like you look at each line item. What do the service sector line items say in the angst of affordability and purchasing power? Utility bills, medical bills, auto insurance.
Yep.
Can you see those in the report?
Yeah, we can see that in the report. Motor vehicle insurance looks pretty flat. Transportation services, lodging, all of that stuff was pretty soft. It's hard to know to what extent this is government shutdown related. My sense is it probably is, and we'll see a bit of a bounce back. And then on the good side, that was all pretty soft outside of maybe some used vehicles.
Fed pick, what do you think?
Ooh.
Who should it be, or who do I think it will be?
Let's go with both. We have time for both answers.
I would love to see Waller. I think he'd be a great pick. And I think markets would really prefer to see Waller. Who do I think is more likely? It's probably more likely to be Hassett. Although it does seem like incrementally over the past couple of weeks, there seems to be some more concerns about Hassett, or at least more hesitation out of the White House for picking him.